Now, this photograph, I have to tell you, was taken on a very special morning. This is the morning I received a call from Stockholm informing me I'd share the Nobel Prize in chemistry. Now, you can imagine that's a very pleasant event to be awakened early in the morning and be told you'd share a Nobel Prize. And I ran to the shower, and my wife, Marye, called my mother back in Minnesota right away to let her know that her son would share the Nobel Prize in chemistry. And again, mother was a farm girl, never had the chance to go to university, but very wise in terms of human behavior. And she thought for a moment, she said, "Marye, tell Peter that's very nice, but don't let it go to his head." And this was not meant to be sarcastic. What she really meant is you still have to do something useful. And this information is nice, it's interesting, but to do something useful with this, I think is really what science is here for. So I got to the laboratory. It had already gone to their heads. They drained 2 bottles of champagne before I arrived. The most amazing event is our university president, Bill Brody, came over to see me. You know, I had no idea we were such close personal friends. But we are to this day close personal friends. And when I went to our office to check the voicemails, it was filled with requests for interviews, press. And then there was a familiar voice, Mahmoud. I showed you his picture. And he was so excited, his voice said, Peter, we've just heard the news. It's unbelievable. And then there's a pause. And the voice became back on. He said, no, it's believable. It's wonderful. And here we see some other evidence of the news getting out, driving home. I'd just like to point out that the implication that I'm Wells Liquor's best customer is an exaggeration. I was able to attend the Canadian reception just now and leave sober, so there's proof. But here we were on the stage at Stockholm with the medal. And I'd just like to reflect for a moment that the prize itself is a wonderful thing. On the other hand, it's really, I think, of greater importance because it's symbolic. The kinds of things that are ongoing in our laboratories, my laboratory, your laboratories, and laboratories around the world are brought to the attention of the public because of the announcements of the Nobel Prize. And so I think really we should respect it as a great PR mechanism for the scientific work ongoing all over the world. So what do you do after this? I actually had large interests in addition to our own laboratory and made a conscious decision about 10 years ago to take part in some of these. And I'll tell you briefly about some of them because I think this is another way in which science is bridging with society. Now, one mechanism which I participated in was with the National Academy of Sciences Committee on Human Rights. Now, that's a closed committee for Academy members, but there's also a program here in the AAAS for individuals interested in working on human rights. And the Academy Committee has now been in existence, I guess that's 34 years. In part, it was started because of the problems with Andrei Sakharov's imprisonment and the crimes against scientists in Argentina. And we advocate on behalf of scientists, engineers, and health professionals in usually private manners with amazing degree of success. I'll share a few with you. You may recall a few years ago in the news when a Palestinian physician and 7 Bulgarian nurses were convicted in Libya of crimes against children, allegedly intentionally infecting children with the HIV virus. In fact, it's quite obvious they had nothing to do with injecting these children with virus, but shoddy hospital practices led to the infection before they arrived. Nevertheless, a scapegoat was identified, and these individuals were condemned to death at the firing squad. An appeal was launched, and it was overruled. So their days were limited, but it was actually the personal contact behind the scenes of a member of the Academy with Muammar Gaddafi who convinced him that a face-saving alternative was there. And in a second public action by Richard Roberts from the New England Biolabs basically sealed the deal. They were released, extradited, I should say, to Bulgaria, where they were pardoned immediately. And here is the celebration. It makes you feel good when your committee can contribute to something like that. Another event, Dr. Tai Waldasemiat, the head of the Ethiopian Teachers Union, imprisoned because he took part in protests against the government in Ethiopia because of the rigging of elections. Because of behind-the-scenes lobbying, he was released. A position for him was obtained in the United States. Again, behind-the-scenes work of the Committee on Human Rights. And a third recent event, Dr. Beniak Sen, a pediatrician in India, who was imprisoned because of his alleged terrorist activities. In fact, he took care of sick people from all backgrounds. Some of them turned out to be Naxalites. He was held for 2 years before he was finally released, and he will now stand trial, but we're convinced he'll be exonerated. So I think scientists have special capacities to cross borders, to cross boundaries, and to influence governments in ways others have problems. And in closing, I'd like to talk about the special part of the AAAS, which I hope people would get interested in. And this has to do with the Center for Scientific Diplomacy. Now, I'm showing you a slide which has some very shocking revelations. This was a poll taken by the Zogby organization a few years back, where they looked at worldviews of the United States, and then of the United States in science. And they looked at a number of Muslim countries. At the top, you can see Morocco, and on the far left, I don't think the pointer is going to show this, but you can see the US in general. In Morocco, for example, only 11% of those polled held a favorable opinion in the United States. 86% an unfavorable. Saudi Arabia, 4 and 94%. These people find real problems with the United States. But if you look at the far right of this column, the US science and technical activities are perceived very, very favorably. Morocco, which doesn't like the US in general, has a 90% favorable impression. The United Arab Emirates, an 84% favorable impression of US science and technology. This is an opportunity for us as scientists, engineers, technologists, to do things which other groups, elected officials, can't do. And the AAAS Center for Scientific Diplomacy here, led by Von Tarikian, has been very active. Now, before my tenure as president of the AAAS, David Baltimore led a number of science diplomatic visits, first to Rwanda and also to Syria. And as Jim mentioned, in the last year I led scientific visits to Cuba and to the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, known to us as North Korea. And shown here is Vaughn. On your left, and Max Angerholzer, Max from the Lounsbury Foundation that funded our visits on the right. And here they are sampling Cuban cigars, and the photo is, of course, of Ernest Hemingway. So in November, we visited Cuba with the idea that we could make contact and create bonds with Cuban scientific officials. There's still evidence in Cuba, even though the revolution occurred 50 years ago, that this is very much alive in Cuba. This is not a Southern California Chevy. This is actually a Cuban Chevy. Because of the embargo, the import of automobiles has been truncated, so they have a lot of old cars there. And while some of the colonial architecture is well maintained because of the embargo, the Cubans are actually suffering quite considerably. Here's a more typical block showing the decay of the architecture because of the lack of building supplies. Yet science goes on in Cuba. And we met with a number of groups. Here I'm photographed with the head of the Cuban Biotechnology Institute and the Finley Vaccine Institute. Their emphasis is somewhat different than ours. Public health is a priority, vaccine development, disaster prevention, and the like. They have a lot to offer. Now, these are some older Cuban scientists, but there are a lot of younger Cuban scientists who are like our young people here. They're not involved in the politics of this embargo. They want to do science. They would like to partner with us, and I think this is an opportunity. Here at the University of Havana, they have a very rich cadre of young students going into science and engineering.